I drove for 15 hours to a child's birthday party. But my daughter told me, "This is only for a close circle, you don't belong here." A couple of days later I got a call from the bank. I don't know when exactly the idea took root, but it was sometime after I learned I would finally be a grandmother. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, staring at the stack of old photo boxes I kept in the closet. Those boxes had traveled with me through 3 moves, 2 floods, and a marriage that started with fireworks and ended with silence. They held my whole life, the baby pictures of my daughter with ribbons in her hair, summers spent by the lake, birthdays with too much cake and not enough chairs, even my own wedding day where my smile looked wider than the horizon. It struck me that these memories weren't mine alone. They belonged to the next generation too, to the little one who was about to arrive and would one day wonder where they came from, what kind of people stood behind them, what kind of love shaped the family they were born into. That's when I decided I would make an album. Not a simple one, not just a collection of pictures stuffed into plastic sleeves. No, I would create something stitched together with time and tenderness, something that would feel like holding history in your hands. I started in January. The evenings were long then, the kind where the sun barely makes an appearance and the house feels too quiet. I spread the photographs across the dining table, sorting them into piles: childhood, school years, holidays, ordinary days. Some were creased from too much handling, others still had the faint scent of cedar from the old box. I smoothed each one as though smoothing out time itself. I bought thick pages of cream paper and a leather-bound cover, sturdy enough to last for decades. I glued in photos carefully, one by one, writing little notes in the margins. Under the picture of my daughter in her Easter dress I wrote, "She insisted on wearing her red rain boots, even though the sun was shining." Beneath a snapshot of my late husband lifting her onto his shoulders at the county fair I added, "She thought she was taller than the Ferris wheel." I wanted my grandchild to know not only the faces, but the stories behind them. For months it became my ritual. Every afternoon after my walk, I'd sit with scissors, glue, and a stack of photos, losing myself in memories. I pressed flowers from the garden between pages, tucked in recipe cards with my handwriting, the chocolate cake that never failed, the chicken soup that cured almost anything. I even stitched the edge of one page with blue thread, because my daughter once loved the color so much she painted her bedroom wall with it. It wasn't always easy. Some nights I cried, remembering what had been lost. The laughter that no longer echoed in the house, the birthdays that passed without a phone call. But I kept going, because this wasn't just about me. It was about giving the new baby something pure, untouched by disappointment, a legacy of love. By spring the album had grown heavy. Its pages swelled with photographs, notes, pressed flowers, and little keepsakes. I slipped in the first report card, a lock of my daughter's hair from her first haircut, even the ticket stub from the drive-in where her father and I had our first date. It was no longer just an album. It was a book of life, a story stitched together with all the pieces of us. When I finally finished, I tied it with a satin ribbon. I sat with it in my lap, running my hand over the cover, feeling proud in a way I hadn't felt in years. This was the gift I would bring. This was how I would welcome my grandchild into the world. The trip itself was no small thing. I'm not young anymore, and driving long hours isn't as simple as it used to be. But I wanted to place that album in my daughter's hands myself. No box, no postman, no chance it could be lost or bent along the way. I wanted her to see me arrive, to know that I had crossed states and miles with nothing but love packed into the seat beside me. I set out early, the car packed with sandwiches, a thermos of coffee, and the album resting carefully on the passenger seat under a soft blanket. The road stretched long and steady. I passed fields just beginning to green with spring, gas stations with peeling signs, little towns with diners promising best pie in the county. I thought about stopping for a slice, but I didn't want to risk getting a crumb on the ribbon. Halfway through, I pulled into a rest stop and carried the album inside with me, as though it were something fragile like glass. I wasn't about to leave it alone in the car. I smiled at myself in the restroom mirror, clutching that book like it was a newborn. Maybe in some way it was. The drive was tiring, but my heart was light. With every mile, I pictured the moment ahead, my daughter opening the door, seeing me there with the album, her face softening, her eyes filling, perhaps even hugging me close and saying, "Thank you, Mom. This means everything." I pictured the baby one day opening it, two little fingers tracing the faces, hearing the stories, knowing they belonged to something bigger, something rooted. By the time I reached the edge of their town, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. I took a deep breath. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. After all these months, the moment had finally come. I turned onto her street, the album safe beside me, my heart filled with nothing but love and hope. When I pulled into the driveway, the air seemed to change. I had pictured warmth, my daughter opening the door with a smile, maybe the smell of dinner wafting through the screen, a grandchild's tiny cry in the background. Instead, the house looked still, almost too quiet for a home with a new baby inside. I parked carefully, smoothed my skirt, and lifted the album from the seat. My hands trembled, but not from age or weariness. It was the kind of trembling that comes when your heart is too full of love, of hope, of longing. I walked up the path, every step slow, steady. My shoes clicked on the concrete like a clock ticking down to a moment I had waited months for. I knocked. Just once, firmly. My daughter's face appeared at the window, just for a second, and relief swept over me. There she was, my little girl, grown, a mother herself now. I braced for the door to swing open, for her arms to reach around me. But when the door opened, her words struck me like a blow I hadn't seen coming. "There was only a close circle here," she said. Her voice was cool, almost rehearsed. "You wouldn't fit in." I blinked, sure I had misheard. Surely she didn't mean it like that. Maybe she was flustered, maybe the baby was crying, maybe the house was full of guests and she was just nervous. But she didn't waver. Her eyes avoided mine. Her hand stayed tight on the edge of the door, not on me. For a moment my whole body felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside. The album grew heavier in my arms, though it hadn't changed an ounce. My lips parted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. I had driven halfway across the country. I had poured months into this gift, this offering of love. And in return I was told I wouldn't fit in. I stood there frozen, the kind of frozen that doesn't show on the outside. My breath still moved, my eyes still blinked, but inside something had gone still as stone. She gave a small nod, polite but distant, and without another word, she closed the door. The click of the latch sounded louder than it should have. I stood there on the porch, staring at the closed door, the album pressed against my chest like a shield that had failed me. For a long moment, I thought maybe the door would open again. Maybe she'd come back, realize how sharp her words had been, pull me inside and say it had all been a mistake. But the house stayed quiet. I turned slowly, my legs stiff. I walked back to the car, not rushing, not dragging, just moving the way you do when your body carries you forward because your heart can't. I placed the album gently on the passenger seat again, pulled the seatbelt across it as though protecting it mattered more than protecting myself. The drive home was silent. The radio stayed off, the windows rolled up. The hum of the tires on the highway was the only sound, steady and unfeeling. I didn't cry. Tears would have meant there was still hope to wash away. Instead, there was just a heavy ache in my chest, the kind that spreads slowly until it fills every corner. I thought of the notes I had written in the margins of those photos, the pressed flowers, the recipe cards. I imagined them lying useless now, unseen, unread. I pictured the baby I had yet to meet, a little face I had dreamed of, never knowing the gift I had carried for them. All those miles stretched behind me like a cruel joke. I had traveled so far, not just on the road but in my heart, building up courage, pouring in love. And yet, in one cold sentence, it was all dismissed. By the time the night sky spread over me, dotted with stars I could barely see through the windshield, I felt smaller than I had in years. I kept both hands on the wheel, gripping it tight, because if I let go, I wasn't sure what would happen. I stopped only once at a rest area. I carried the album with me again, unable to leave it behind even for a moment. I sat on a bench under the dim glow of a street lamp and ran my fingers over the leather cover. I whispered, "You deserved better." I wasn't sure if I meant the album, the grandchild, or myself. When I finally reached home, the house felt colder than ever. I set the album on the kitchen table and stared at it, still tied with its ribbon. It looked untouched, as though none of the miles, none of the silence, none of the rejection had happened. But I knew better. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the creaks of the house, the distant hum of a passing truck, the lonely call of an owl. My mind replayed her words again and again. There was only a close circle here. You wouldn't fit in. I wondered when I had stopped fitting in. Was it when she grew up and built her own life? Was it the years when calls became less frequent, visits shorter? Or had it happened long before, silently, without me even noticing? By morning I felt emptied out. I brewed coffee, but it tasted like nothing. I sat at the table staring at the album, ribbon still uncut. I could have opened it, flipped through the pages, reminded myself of the love stitched inside. But I didn't. Because love, no matter how carefully preserved, had been turned away at the door. And yet, somewhere deep inside, beneath the ache, a small spark of stubbornness stirred. I had driven home in silence, yes. I had swallowed her rejection without a word, yes. But the album still existed. The love inside it was still real. I didn't know then that it would one day hold a new meaning, that its story wasn't finished. All I knew was that, for now, I had been left on the porch, heart sinking, carrying back home what should have been a gift. It was 3 days after I returned home. The album still sat on my kitchen table, tied with its ribbon, untouched. I passed it every time I made tea, every time I fetched the mail, every time I sat down to eat. It seemed to watch me, waiting for the moment it would fulfill its purpose. But it hadn't. It was like a guest who never got to enter the party. That morning the sun streamed through the blinds, making stripes across the linoleum floor. I was buttering a piece of toast when the phone rang. The sound startled me. I don't get many calls these days. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked up. "Mrs. Harris?" the voice asked. It was sharp, official, the kind of tone that makes you sit straighter in your chair. "This is Central Bank calling about your loan." "Loan?" I repeated. My first thought was that they had the wrong number. I hadn't applied for a loan since the 1980s, back when my husband and I refinanced the house. "Yes, ma'am," the man continued briskly. "Your $120,000 loan, approved last week. We're just following up on repayment scheduling." My heart stopped cold. "There must be a mistake," I said. "I never applied for a loan. I don't owe you anything." The man hesitated, and I heard the shuffle of papers. "Mrs. Anna Harris, correct? Date of birth July 3rd, 1949? "Yes," I whispered, my stomach dropping. He cleared his throat. "Well, the application is in your name, signed and notarized. And we have the witness signature as well." "Witness?" I asked, gripping the receiver so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Yes, your daughter. She signed as a witness." The kitchen tilted around me. My toast slid off the plate, forgotten. I clutched the edge of the counter, the cord of the phone taut against my ear. "That's impossible," I said. "My daughter would never." But I stopped myself. Wouldn't she? After the doorstep rejection, after those words, "You wouldn't fit in." A sliver of doubt sliced through me. The man continued with businesslike detachment, listing figures and repayment terms, as if I hadn't just told him it was a mistake. "You'll receive the first invoice in the mail," he said. "If you believe this was unauthorized, you'll need to file a fraud report." When the call ended, I stood in silence, the dial tone humming like a cruel reminder. I set the receiver back in its cradle with trembling hands. I walked slowly to the table and sat down. The album stared back at me, ribbon still tied. Beside it now was a new weight, not love, not memory, but fear. I thought of my daughter's face at the door, the way her eyes slid away from mine. Could it be? Could she have signed something knowing it wasn't right? My heart wanted to defend her, but my mind whispered doubts. I pulled open my drawer and took out my checkbook, my bank statements. I had lived carefully all these years, counting pennies, avoiding debt. I'd clipped coupons, patched clothes, gone without vacations, all so I would never owe more than I could pay. And now suddenly a $120,000 debt sat on my shoulders, one I had never asked for. The kettle whistled, shrill and piercing. I turned it off without pouring the water. My stomach churned too much for tea. For hours I paced the house. I checked the mailbox twice, though I knew it was too soon for papers to arrive. I pulled out old files, searching for any place I might have signed something carelessly. Nothing. By afternoon I sat back down at the table, staring at the album again. I pressed my palm against the leather cover, wishing it could steady me. That book was supposed to be a gift, a bridge to the next generation. Instead, I was being buried under papers I had never seen, signatures I had never made. And my daughter's name was there. I can't explain the kind of ache that brings. It's not like breaking a bone. It's deeper, heavier, like the earth shifting under your feet. You think you know the people you love. You think your memories protect you. But then you hear something like that. A bank clerk reading your child's name from a document, and suddenly nothing feels safe. That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The shadows on the wall looked strange, unfriendly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face again, standing in the doorway saying you wouldn't fit in. And now this. When morning came, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay quiet. I had to find out the truth. After the phone call, I couldn't seem to shake the cold that settled in my bones. It wasn't the kind of chill you fix with an extra sweater or a cup of tea. It was the kind that seeps deeper. The kind that whispers in your ear that something you once trusted might not be true anymore. The bank papers hadn't even arrived yet, and already the damage had been done. I didn't need to see them. The man on the phone had been so sure, his voice so businesslike, reading off my information as if he were listing groceries. Name, date of birth, address. And then that final cut, my daughter's name as witness. At first, I told myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe someone had stolen her name the way they had stolen mine. Maybe it was some sort of clerical error. Surely she wouldn't sign something like that, not without telling me. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and try as I might, I couldn't keep it from sprouting. I thought back to the doorstep, her words sharp as glass. There was only a close circle here. You wouldn't fit in. I had turned those words over and over in my mind, trying to soften them, to make them mean less than they did. But paired with the bank's revelation, they sounded harsher, heavier. Could she really have done this to me? That question haunted me. I paced my small kitchen, staring at the photo album on the table. It had gone from a gift of love to a kind of silent witness. I almost wished I had never made it, because every time I looked at it now, I saw not only the memories but also the painful distance between the woman my daughter had been and the woman she had become. I wanted to call her to demand answers, but I didn't. My voice shook too much even when I rehearsed it in my head. Instead, I sat in my armchair and let the memories wash over me. I remembered her as a little girl, sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, signing her name for the very first time in crayon. How proud she was to show me those crooked letters. I had clapped and hugged her tight. That's your name, sweetheart. No one else's. Back then her name meant innocence, a promise. Now it was printed on papers that accused me of debts I had never touched. The day after the call, I confided in my neighbor Margaret. She's a widow too, and we often share coffee on her porch. I told her, haltingly, about the bank, about the forged signature, about my daughter's name appearing as witness. Margaret frowned, her hands tightening around her mug. "Anna, you need to be careful," she said. "These days it's often family who gets tangled up in these things. I've seen it before. Children pressed into things they don't understand, or worse, doing it themselves." Her words stung, not because they were unkind, but because they rang too close to the doubts already circling inside me. That evening I tried to distract myself by cleaning. I pulled everything out of the hall closet, sorted through old coats, folded blankets. But even there, even with dust in my nose and the radio humming faintly, the thought gnawed at me. What if it's true? What if my own daughter did this? I thought of the times I had slipped her money when she was younger. 20s tucked into her hand when she left for college, grocery bags filled with extra cans and boxes when she was first married. I had always believed in helping her, even when it pinched my own budget. It was what mothers did. But this wasn't help. This was theft, betrayal. A knife slipped quietly between the ribs. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake, listening to the wind against the window. Around 2 in the morning, I rose and went to the kitchen. The album was still on the table. I untied the ribbon and opened it for the first time since my return. The photos stared back at me. My daughter in her kindergarten dress, blowing out candles on her 12th birthday, walking across the stage in her graduation gown. Page after page of love, of pride, of everything I had poured into her. And now her name sat on papers at a bank, marking me as $120,000 in debt. I wept then quietly, my head bowed over the album. Not loud sobs, just steady tears. The kind that come when the heart has no other outlet. By morning my eyes were swollen, but my resolve was sharper. I couldn't let this question rot inside me. I had to know the truth. The doubt in my family had already been planted. Now it was time to find out whether it would destroy us or whether there was something deeper at play. I didn't know yet that the truth would be far more tangled than I imagined. After days of pacing, crying, and staring at that cursed phone, I finally admitted to myself, I couldn't untangle this alone. I had spent 70-odd years learning how to bake bread without a recipe, how to mend shirts with a needle so fine you couldn't see the stitch, how to survive the quiet after my husband passed. But banks, lawyers, forged signatures, that was a different battlefield. So I picked up the phone again, this time to call Henry. Henry had been a friend of my late husband, and though life had scattered us in different directions, he still checked in from time to time. He'd been a lawyer before retirement, sharp-minded and steady. The kind of man who could read 10 lines of legal jargon and tell you exactly which ones were meant to trip you. When he answered, I didn't bother with pleasantries. My voice cracked as I spilled the story. The loan, the forged signature, my daughter's name as witness. I told him everything except the part where my heart was breaking. "Anna," he said after a long pause, "don't panic. That's the first thing. But don't ignore it either. Fraud like this doesn't just disappear. You'll need proof, and you'll need patience." "Proof?" I whispered. "All I have are their words over the phone." "That's where we start," he said. "I'll help you file the report. But you're going to need to gather everything: bank letters, loan documents, even your own statements about where you were. Keep a paper trail. And Anna, don't sign a single thing without me looking at it first." His calm gave me something to hold on to. After I hung up, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, stronger than usual, and spread a folder open on the table. Into it went every envelope, every scrap that might matter. I wrote notes on yellow paper, dates, names, times of phone calls. It was messy, but it was a start. Still, the loneliness of it pressed heavy, so I went looking for others who might understand. Late one night, I stumbled across a small group of women online, widows, mostly grandmothers like me, sharing their stories of scams and fraud. Some had lost savings to slick-talking salesmen. Others had found their children's names used on loans they'd never seen. Their words were raw, but threaded with a quiet strength. I read for hours, my eyes burning. It was like looking into a mirror. The shame, the doubt, the ache of being tricked not by strangers, but by those close enough to know your weaknesses. The next day, I gathered courage and wrote my own post. Just a few lines. My name is Anna. I'm 74. The bank says I owe $120,000 for a loan I never took. My daughter's name is on the papers as witness. I don't know what to believe anymore. I expected silence, maybe even judgment. Instead, replies poured in. Anna, you're not alone. My son-in-law forged my name too. Stay strong. Do not let the bank bully you. Make them prove everything. Reading their words, I felt less like a helpless victim and more like a soldier joining a line of women who refused to bow. That week, Margaret, my neighbor, came by with a casserole. She set it down on my counter and said, Anna, you've been pacing holes in your carpet. Sit. Eat. As we shared the meal, I told her about Henry, about the women online, about the file I was building. Margaret nodded firmly. Good. Don't let them think you're weak. You've got more steel in you than you know. Her faith in me made my shoulders straighten a little. But the nights were still the hardest. I'd lie awake, hearing the bank clerk's voice again, repeating my daughter's name as witness. I wanted to believe she had been tricked. I wanted to believe she hadn't known. But the doubt gnawed like a rat in the dark. One evening, unable to bear the silence, I untied the ribbon on the album again. I flipped through the pages until I found a picture of her at 16, standing by her first car, grinning like she owned the world. I traced her face with my finger. Why, sweetheart? I whispered into the quiet. Why would you put your name on something like this? The photo gave no answer. But the ache in my chest hardened into something new. Not just sorrow but resolve. I closed the album, retied the ribbon, and slid it back onto the shelf. It wasn't ready to be given yet. Not until the truth was uncovered. That night, I wrote 3 words on the first page of my yellow pad. Bold and underlined. Find the truth. I didn't know yet where the trail would lead. But I knew I wasn't walking it alone anymore. The papers arrived in a thick envelope, the kind that lands heavy in your mailbox and heavier still in your chest. I sat at the kitchen table with Henry, who had driven over to help me go through them. He spread the pages out carefully, like a surgeon laying out instruments. Here, he said, tapping a line with his pen. This is the loan agreement. Signed by you supposedly and notarized. And here, your daughter's name signed as witness. I stared at the looping handwriting. It looked like mine, but it wasn't. The A was too sharp, the N too narrow. Still, to the untrained eye, it was close enough. My daughter's signature, though, that was unmistakable. I'd watched her practice it as a teenager, carving her name into the back of school notebooks with hearts around it. Now it sat here, black ink on legal paper, binding me to a debt I never touched. Henry studied the notarization details. Something's off, he murmured. Look at the timing. The paperwork was filed electronically, but the timestamps don't line up with standard procedures. Whoever submitted this was rushing. I swallowed hard. But why would she, my daughter, sign something without reading it? Henry looked at me with a steady gaze. Because someone put it in front of her. Maybe your son-in-law. Maybe he made it sound harmless. People sign things all the time they don't understand. The thought twisted inside me. I wanted so badly to believe it, that she hadn't meant harm, that she hadn't known. But doubt still pressed in, heavy as wet wool. That week, Henry filed the fraud report and requested the bank's internal logs. It took time, but when the records finally came, the picture sharpened. We sat side by side at my table again, papers spread out, coffee cups cooling between us. Henry ran his finger down a printout. "Here it is," he said. "The loan officer's notes. Look who managed the account." I leaned in. My breath caught. There it was, clear as day, my son-in-law's name. He had logged into the system, submitted the application, even scheduled the disbursement. "It wasn't your daughter," Henry said quietly. "She signed as a witness, but the real work, this was him." The room seemed to tilt. Relief and sorrow washed through me at the same time. Two tides crashing together. My daughter hadn't masterminded this. She hadn't set out to ruin me. But she had still signed. Carelessly, hurriedly, without asking what she was putting her name to. I closed my eyes, remembering the day I met him. The young man with the polished shoes and too eager smile, shaking my hand at their wedding rehearsal. I had thought he seemed ambitious, maybe a little slick, but harmless. How wrong I'd been. Henry leaned back in his chair. "Anna, this is what we needed. Proof. The bank can't ignore this. He'll be the one they hold responsible." I nodded, though my heart felt too heavy to lift. Proof was one thing. Healing the wound of doubt was another. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the evidence still fresh in my mind. My daughter's face floated before me, tired and distracted, maybe not even realizing the papers she signed would cost her mother sleepless nights and a cracked heart. By morning, the truth had settled over me like a blanket. Uncomfortable but undeniable. It was him. My son-in-law had orchestrated the loan, pushed the papers, stolen my name. My daughter was caught in the middle, perhaps blind to it all. Later that week, I attended another meeting with the women from the support group. I told them what we'd found. One woman, Linda, patted my hand. "That's how it usually is," she said. "It's not the daughters, it's the men they trust. They rush them into signing, tell them it's just a formality. And by the time they realize, it's too late." Her words should have comforted me, but they didn't. Because whether she had known or not, my daughter's name was still there, printed on that page, dragging me into a mess I never asked for. That evening, I walked to the shelf where the photo album sat. I pulled it down, untied the ribbon, and flipped to the page where my daughter was holding her newborn doll at age 5, smiling wide, hair in crooked braids. She had once trusted me with her whole world. And I had trusted her. Now trust felt like a shattered plate. Some pieces could be glued back together, perhaps, but the cracks would always show. Still, the records had spoken. The truth was on paper now, not just in whispers and doubt. And though the path ahead would be hard, at least I knew where to point my anger. At least I knew where the real betrayal had begun. The weeks that followed were like walking through fog. On the one hand, Henry's investigation had lifted a weight. I wasn't crazy and I wasn't careless. My name had been stolen, my signature forged. But on the other hand, the truth was heavier than the lie. Because it wasn't strangers in some far-off office. It was family. I tried to keep myself busy, gardening, mending, even baking pies I didn't really want to eat. But every quiet moment my thoughts circled back. I'd catch myself wondering if my daughter lay awake at night the way I did, thinking about that line her pen had drawn across the page. Did she regret it? Or did she push it from her mind, convincing herself it wasn't her problem? Then one morning the proof came in a form no one could deny. It was Margaret who showed me. She knocked on my door with her tablet tucked under her arm, her eyes wide. "Anna," she said, "you need to see this." She set it on my kitchen table, and there on the screen was a photo. My son-in-law, beaming beside a brand new car. Shiny as a mirror, paint the color of midnight, chrome glinting like jewelry. The caption beneath it read, "Hard work pays off. Finally got my dream ride. $120,000 well spent." My breath left me in a rush. 120,000. The exact amount of that loan. I gripped the edge of the table, staring at the picture. His grin spread ear to ear, his arm thrown casually over the car roof, like a boy showing off a prize toy. And there were comments, dozens of them. "Congrats, man. Looks amazing. Worth every penny." Not one person asking how he had managed to afford it so suddenly. Not one person knowing that the penny wasn't his, it was mine. Something inside me hardened then. All the nights of doubt, the tears shed wondering about my daughter's role, the ache of being turned away at her door, all of it pulled tight like a knot. And at the center of that knot was this photo. This smug proof, posted for the world to see, that my son-in-law had stolen from me and had the audacity to brag about it. When Henry saw the screenshot, his eyes narrowed. "This," he said, "is the nail in the coffin. No judge, no bank, no jury could ignore this." He practically confessed in public. But for me it wasn't just legal proof. It was personal. It was the final link in the chain that told me exactly where my love and trust had been twisted. My daughter hadn't masterminded this. She had been swept up, maybe careless, maybe blind, but not cruel. The cruelty had been his, bold and glittering like that car in the photograph. I thought back to years of family dinners where he had sat at my table, eating food I'd cooked, listening to stories I'd told. I remembered Christmas mornings when I bought him gifts as though he were another son. I thought of the times I had handed him leftovers in foil packets, pressed cash into his hand when I knew they were tight. All those gestures, all those quiet acts of care, now mocked by a picture of him leaning smugly on a car bought with my name. The anger that rose in me was different from sorrow. Sorrow makes you small, folds you in on yourself. Anger straightens your spine. It wakes you up. For the first time in weeks I felt strong. I printed the photo and pinned it to the front of my folder of evidence. It wasn't just proof for the court. It was a reminder for me. A reminder not to doubt myself anymore. Not to let guilt eat me alive. That night, I sat in my chair by the window with the album in my lap. I untied the ribbon once more and flipped to the last page, which was blank. I slipped the photo of the car inside, not as part of the family story, but as a marker. A reminder that even the brightest smiles can hide shadows. Looking out at the dark street beyond my window, I whispered, "It ends here." Because sometimes, sweetheart, the truth doesn't arrive with trumpets or confessions. Sometimes it comes shining too bright to ignore. A brand new car, bought with stolen money, flashing like a beacon for everyone to see. And with that, the chain of doubt was complete. I knew exactly where the money had gone, and soon enough so would the bank. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish, a mix that clung to the air like history itself. I'd only been in such places a handful of times in my life, once for jury duty, once to pay a traffic ticket, but never like this, never with my own name hanging in the balance. Henry walked beside me, steady as ever. He carried the folder of evidence tucked under his arm, the forged loan documents, the bank logs, the screenshot of the shiny black car with its boastful caption. I carried nothing but a small handbag and my determination. We sat on the hard wooden benches, waiting for the case to be called. My son-in-law entered the room with his lawyer, wearing a suit a shade too slick, a tie a shade too bold. He didn't look at me. My daughter trailed behind him, pale and tight-lipped. She glanced my way just once, but her eyes dropped quickly, as if even that much cost her. When the judge called us forward, I felt my knees tremble. But Henry gave me the smallest nod, and I stood straighter. The bank was there too, represented by their own lawyer, who looked uncomfortable, as if he'd rather be anywhere else than explaining why his institution had allowed such negligence. Because that was the truth. Had they looked closely, had they verified properly, none of this would have gone so far. The first piece of evidence laid out was the signature comparison. An expert testified that my so-called signature was forged. He pointed out the inconsistencies, the way the E was angled, the unnatural slant of the H. He showed overlays, enlargements, details I wouldn't have noticed myself. "This is not the handwriting of Anna Harris," he said firmly. Hearing it spoken aloud was like a breath I hadn't realized I was holding finally let loose. It wasn't me. I hadn't imagined it. Next came the bank logs. Henry guided the questioning, calm and precise. The records showed my son-in-law's name logged in, managing the account, filing documents. Each line of data was a stone added to the pile against him. And then the car. The photo was displayed for the court, projected large and undeniable. My son-in-law shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. His lawyer tried to object, saying social media posts were irrelevant, but the judge allowed it. The caption, $120,000 well spent, rang out like a gavel strike. I glanced at my daughter then. She had her hands clenched in her lap, her face pale as milk. I wanted to reach out to comfort her, but I stayed still. This was her reckoning too. The bank's lawyer stood, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, we admit negligence. The loan should never have been approved without proper verification. We recognize Mrs. Harris as the victim of fraud in this case." Those words settled over me like a bomb, not because they erased the pain but because they acknowledged it. They named me for what I was. Not a careless old woman, not a fool, but a victim of deception. The judge's ruling came swiftly after that. My name was cleared of the debt. The bank was ordered to take corrective measures. And my son-in-law, well, his punishment was more than financial. He was fired from his job, held liable for repayment, and before long, charged criminally for the fraud. When the gavel finally came down, a hush filled the room. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap. Relief should have come like a flood, but it was quieter than that. It was like a slow dawn spreading gently after a long night. Outside the courthouse, reporters lingered, but I had no interest in talking to them. I wanted nothing more than to go home, to sit in my own kitchen, to breathe air that wasn't laced with tension. Henry walked me to my car. "You did well," he said simply. "I just told the truth," I replied. But truth, I realized, had a weight of its own. It could bruise, it could cut, but it could also free. That evening, back at home, I untied the ribbon of the album once more. I slipped in a copy of the court ruling, not because I wanted to remember the pain, but because I wanted the story complete. Someday perhaps my grandchild would see it and know. Their grandmother had stood up, had fought back, had not let her name be stolen. The trial had ended, but in many ways the reckoning had just begun. After the trial, I thought I'd feel lighter, as though a heavy coat had finally been lifted from my shoulders. And in some ways I did. The debt was gone, my name was cleared, and the truth had been dragged out into daylight where no one could deny it. But the heart, sweetheart, doesn't heal as neatly as court documents. Paper may be stamped and filed away, but people are messier. I hadn't spoken much to my daughter since that day on her porch, when she turned me away with words that still echoed in my ears. But after the trial she called me. Her voice was small, tired, nothing like the sharpness I remembered at the doorway. "Mom," she said after a long silence, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what I was signing." I held the receiver tightly. There were so many things I wanted to say. Anger, disappointment, the ache of betrayal. But what came out was quiet. "Why didn't you ask? Why didn't you take one moment to read what you were putting your name on?" Her breath caught. "Because he told me it was routine. Just a form. He was in a hurry and the baby was crying and I just signed." I closed my eyes. I could picture it too well. Her distracted, juggling motherhood and marriage, trusting the man beside her to guide the way. I wanted to shake her, to remind her that trust is not the same as blind obedience. But she was already paying the price, wasn't she? Her world had cracked wide open. "He used me, Mom," she whispered. "He used both of us." For a moment the silence stretched between us, fragile as spun glass. Then she said the words I had been waiting to hear, though I hadn't dared hope for them. I've filed for divorce. I sat down hard in my kitchen chair, my hand over my heart. Divorce, such a heavy word, especially spoken by my own daughter. But it was also a word of courage. She told me how it had unraveled after the trial. The fights at home, the lies exposed, the way he had tried to twist the story even when the evidence stood against him. She said she looked at that car in the driveway, shiny and new, and realized it was built not only on stolen money, but on stolen trust. I can't raise my child in that kind of deceit, she said. Her voice was steadier now, more like the girl I remembered. The girl who once promised me she'd never let anyone walk over her. I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me wanted to scold her, to tell her she should have seen it sooner, that her carelessness had nearly ruined me. But another part, perhaps the stronger part, saw not a careless woman but a wounded one, finally finding her strength. "You're doing the right thing," I said softly. She started to cry then, real tears, not the silent ones of guilt but the messy ones of release. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she sobbed. "I pushed you away. I thought he was everything. And I let that blind me. I should have listened. I should have seen." Her words cracked something in me, and before I knew it, tears slid down my own cheeks. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear her say those things, how much I'd been holding on to bitterness, afraid forgiveness would make me weak. But hearing her own regret, her own pain, it softened me. We stayed on the phone for a long while, talking not as mother and daughter divided by betrayal, but as two women clawing their way back from hurt. She told me about her plans, about the lawyer she'd met with, about how she was determined to protect her child from further damage. "I don't know what the future looks like," she admitted, "but I know I can't let him shape it anymore." Her words reminded me of something my own mother used to say. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is walk away. When we finally hung up, I sat at the table in silence. The house was quiet, but for the first time in months it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like waiting for something new, something tender to begin. Later that evening I pulled the album down once more. I untied the ribbon, turned to a page where my daughter was 8 years old, holding a sunflower taller than herself. Her grin stretched wide, fearless. I pressed my hand to that page and whispered, "Welcome back, sweetheart. Welcome back to yourself." The road ahead wouldn't be easy for her, for me, for the little one caught in the middle. But in her decision to step away from deceit, I saw a glimmer of hope. A chance that this family, battered though it was, might still find its way to truth. For months, that album sat on my table like a question mark. I had poured my heart into it, driven across states with it, buckled into the passenger seat like a companion, only to bring it back unopened. It was meant to be a gift, a bridge between generations, yet it had been left to gather dust, tied neatly in ribbon. But after the trial, after my daughter's tears and her brave choice to step away from the man who had deceived us both, the album began to change for me. It was no longer just a rejected offering. It had become something deeper, something stronger. One afternoon, I untied the ribbon again. I turned the pages slowly. Baby pictures, birthdays, summer afternoons, holidays where the house rang with laughter. Each page was like a stitch, pulling us back together, reminding me that love, though battered, still had roots. At the very back, I had slipped the court ruling and the photograph of that car. It felt strange at first, mixing joy and betrayal in the same book. But then I realized that was life. Our family's story was not just sunshine and picnics. It was storms and shadows too. To pretend otherwise would be a lie. And truth, I had learned, was the only legacy worth leaving. Not long after, my daughter came to visit. She looked tired but lighter, as though shedding lies had given her back her breath. She brought the baby bundled in soft blankets, eyes wide and curious. I placed the album on her lap. "This was always meant for your child," I said gently. "But now it's for you too." She untied the ribbon, just as I had done so many times. Her fingers trembled as she turned the first page. She laughed softly at one picture, wiped her eyes at another. And when she reached the last pages, the trial, the car, the proof of truth, she looked up at me with tears that needed no words. In that moment I knew the album had finally found its place. Not just as a gift but as a symbol. It held our history, yes, but also our dignity, our survival, our decision to face lies with truth. As I held my grandchild that day, tiny fingers wrapping around mine, I felt a peace I hadn't known in a long time. Because what mattered most wasn't the money or the car or even the betrayal. What mattered was this: memory, dignity, and truth. These were the real inheritance. These were the things no forgery could ever steal. And that, sweetheart, was the gift I carried across the miles all along. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.